Why did the room fall silent when she entered? No one knew her name. No one cared to ask. To them, she was just another nervous recruit in a sea of blue uniforms and shaved-down egos. But if they had looked a little closer, past the plain haircut, the tired eyes, and the humble silence, they might have seen something in her gaze, a steadiness that didn't belong in someone just beginning their training. That woman was Fleet Admiral Diane Carpenter. 30 years of service, 3 wars, dozens of commendations, and right now she was pretending to be no one at all. The first act of cruelty came before sunrise. Cadet Kyle Anderson had swaggered through the breakfast line like he owned the base, his confidence loud and brittle. He was the self-appointed alpha of Division 148, the kind of man who mistook fear for respect, the kind who needed someone smaller, quieter, weaker, to remind himself he was strong. That morning his eyes found her. "Hey, new girl," he'd said, smirking. "You even know how to wear that thing right." She didn't answer, just kept her eyes down, tray steady in her hands. Kyle laughed, and before anyone could react, he spat. A thin arc of saliva hit the fabric of her navy uniform and slid down the insignia, right across the emblem that symbolized everything she had spent her life defending. The galley went silent, forks froze midair. And the quiet woman just looked at him, calmly, evenly, as if she were studying something fragile and already broken. Then she walked away. No one stopped her, no one said a word. They didn't know, not yet. That single act of contempt would set off a chain reaction that would change everything inside Naval Station Great Lakes. But for now she swallowed her pride, sat alone, and let the insult hang in the air like static. She had a mission. Undercover, Diane Carpenter had been sent by the Pentagon itself to investigate reports of systematic abuse, young recruits driven to the edge, hazing disguised as discipline, instructors turning blind eyes. And now, she'd found the infection. It was standing right in front of her, laughing. That night, under the sickly buzz of fluorescent lights in Barracks Building 1405, she lay awake on the thin mattress, staring up at the ceiling. Around her, 72 other recruits slept, snoring, shifting, muttering through dreams born of exhaustion and fear. The barracks smelled of metal, detergent, and quiet desperation. She wasn't supposed to care. She was supposed to observe, record, report. But the sound of a girl crying softly 2 bunks down made it hard to stay detached. Rachel Jensen, barely 19, joined to escape a small Minnesota town that had offered her nothing but debt and dead ends. And like so many before her, she'd thought the Navy would give her a purpose. Instead, it had given her tormentors. Footsteps echoed down the aisle. 3 silhouettes moving with the confidence of predators in their own territory. Kyle Anderson, his shadow Craig Hoffman, and Justin Bauer, the brute who followed orders without thinking. They stopped by Rachel's bunk. "Inspection time," Kyle whispered, his voice slicing through the dark. Rachel didn't move. Kyle grabbed the edge of her mattress and flipped it hard. She gasped, hitting the floor. The sound made something deep in Diane's chest tighten. She had commanded men through combat, had watched soldiers die with her name on their lips, and yet this helpless cruelty was harder to watch than any battlefield. Rachel scrambled up, trembling. "What do you want?" she asked. Kyle smiled, and it wasn't the kind of smile people forget. "Your locker," he said. "Heard it's not up to standard." 2 others grabbed her arms, pulling her toward the front. The sound of metal doors creaking open filled the room. Diane stayed low, shadowed, watching. Rachel's locker was immaculate. Uniforms folded, toiletries arranged with surgical precision, a small photograph taped inside, a family of 4, smiling beneath a banner that said, "We love you, Rachel." Kyle didn't look, didn't need to. The inspection wasn't about order, it was about power. He swept his arm across the shelves, sending everything crashing to the floor. The photograph fell face down, glass cracking. Pathetic, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You call this Navy standard. This is garbage, you're garbage. Rachel stood there silent, shoulders slumped. Diane wanted to move, to stand, to command, to crush this cruelty under the weight of her true rank, but she couldn't. Not yet. Her cover was everything. If she broke it now, she'd stop one bully and lose the proof of something far worse. She clenched her fists beneath the blanket. Wait, she told herself, just a little longer. Kyle leaned close to Rachel's ear. Maybe the Navy isn't for people like you, he whispered. Maybe you should just quit now and save us the trouble. Then he walked away, laughing. The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. When they were gone, Diane moved. Quietly, she knelt beside Rachel and began helping her pick up the scattered items. Rachel froze, startled. Don't, she whispered. If they see you helping me, they'll come for you next. Let them, Diane said softly. I've been through worse. She picked up the photograph. The crack ran right through Rachel's family's faces. Diane turned it over carefully, dusting off the shards. You have people who believe in you, she murmured. Rachel swallowed hard. Not here. Diane looked at her, really looked. The girl's eyes were red but unbroken, and that, she thought, is what they can't stand, strength that doesn't need to shout. They finished in silence. Before leaving, Diane touched Rachel's shoulder, a simple gesture, but in that world of fear, it was a rebellion. When Diane returned to her bunk, the weight of what she'd witnessed settled over her. She started mentally cataloging names and details. Anderson, ringleader, psychologically abusive. Hoffman and Bauer, followers, weak, complicit. Victim, Jensen, resilient, nearing a breaking point. The most damning detail, no supervisor present, no duty officer, no oversight. 72 recruits under the control of a few sadistic peers, and the command did nothing. That was the real infection. Not one bully, but an entire system built on silence. The next morning, lights snapped on at 500 like a flashbang in the dark. On your feet, move, move, move. Chaos, recruits scrambling into uniforms, making bunks with shaking hands. Diane moved like she'd done this her whole life, which she had, but made sure to look a little slow, a little clumsy, a perfect disguise. Master Chief Dennis Mueller strode down the line, a man built from decades of fatigue. 58 years old, 2 years from retirement, and carrying the quiet guilt of someone who'd seen too much and done too little. He stopped at Rachel's bunk. Her posture was perfect, her eyes hollow. Adequate, Jensen, he said flatly, and moved on. Adequate, that was all he said. Diane's jaw tightened. He'd seen the fear, the bruised spirit, but adequate was safer than I see you, safer than caring. When Mueller reached Diane, he found the crooked collar she'd left intentionally. Miller, he barked. That collar off, fix it, strike one. Yes, Master Chief. He moved on, and with every step Diane saw it clearer. The rot wasn't hidden, it was accepted. Everyone played their part, keeping the machine running no matter who it crushed. Later in the galley, Rachel sat alone again, her tray untouched. Diane joined her. How long's it been like this? She asked quietly. Rachel hesitated, then said, Since day 2. Kyle decided I didn't belong here, said I was too weak. He's been trying to make me quit ever since. Anyone else? There's a girl, Amy Schultz, and others. They pick us out, the quiet ones. If we complain, we fail tests, lose privileges. One girl went to Commander Lindström last month. Next day, she failed a fitness test everyone saw her pass. And they recycled her, sent her back to start over. 2 weeks later, she tried to kill herself. Diane's spoon froze midair. She had her proof. It wasn't just rogue cadets, it was systemic, protected. Before she could say more, a shadow fell across their table. Kyle Anderson. Well, look at this, he said loudly. The loser table got new members. Craig and Justin snickered behind him. Diane kept her eyes on her tray, steady. Play the role, stay small. Kyle leaned closer. Word of advice, Miller. Stick with Jensen, you'll end up just like her, crying, recycled, forgotten. Rachel flinched but said nothing. Diane didn't move, didn't blink. Kyle smirked and walked off. The galley's noise slowly returned, but the humiliation hung in the air like smoke. "I'm sorry," Rachel whispered. "You shouldn't have sat here." "I made my choice," Diane said. They ate in silence, but as Diane glanced up, she saw something unexpected. A lieutenant near the entrance, watching. A young officer with sharp eyes and a name tag that read Richardson. Their eyes met for just a second, a flicker of understanding. Then the lieutenant looked away. Someone else had noticed, someone who cared. That was something. That afternoon, during obstacle training, Diane kept to herself, careful not to stand out. She watched Kyle's crew harass weaker recruits, mocking, tripping, stealing gear. She logged every incident in her mind, each one a nail in their eventual court-martial. 17 separate abuses by day's end. Each one ignored by instructors. Each one eroding the soul of the Navy she had once loved. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Diane knew what she was facing wasn't a few bad cadets. It was a culture of silence, a hierarchy that protected cruelty because cruelty maintained order. And somewhere above it all sat Commander Lindström, untouched, unbothered, complicit. As night fell, Diane stood outside the barracks for a long time, the wind cutting through her uniform. She thought of Rachel's cracked photograph, of the way that girl's eyes had looked when she said, "Not here. Not here." That phrase echoed through her mind like an accusation. Diane had spent her life teaching others that the uniform was sacred, that wearing it meant dignity, service, honor. But here, inside these walls, that symbol had been spat on, literally, and no one had stopped it. Not yet. She took a slow breath, steadying herself against the cold. 2 days in, and she had already seen enough to destroy careers. But she needed more, needed to make it impossible for the Navy to look away. In the morning, she would begin to tighten the noose. For now, she closed her eyes and whispered to the dark. "They think silence protects them. It won't." Then she turned, walked back into the barracks and lay down in her bunk. Just another recruit in a sea of broken rules and buried truths. But inside, she was already building the reckoning. And when it came, it would be absolute. Why did Lieutenant Richardson look away so quickly? That question lingered in Diane's mind all night. Officers didn't glance at recruits like that unless they knew something, unless they saw something they weren't supposed to. By morning, the thought had hardened into instinct. Richardson wasn't an enemy. She was a thread, and if Diane pulled carefully enough, the whole cover-up might unravel. But timing mattered. The lights in Barracks 1405 snapped on at 500 again, blinding white. The sound of boots hitting the floor filled the air. The same chaos, the same tension, but now something else too. The quiet unease of people who'd witnessed a humiliation and were pretending it never happened. Rachel Jensen's face was pale as she dressed, her hands trembling slightly. Diane helped her button her collar without a word, a small act of humanity in a place that seemed built to erase it. Master Chief Mueller entered with his clipboard, and that deadened gaze that said he'd learned long ago to stop seeing too much. "Line up, eyes forward." Rows snapped into attention, boots aligned. The room fell silent except for the scribble of Mueller's pen as he walked down the line. He stopped at Kyle Anderson. "Outstanding as always, Anderson," he said. A subtle nod, a quiet reward. It was small, almost meaningless, but to the others it said everything. Kyle was untouchable. When Mueller moved on, Diane's chest tightened. So that's how deep it went. Favoritism disguised as leadership. Corruption hidden beneath the mask of discipline. Her turn came. Mueller stopped in front of her, eyes scanning her uniform with practiced disinterest. "Collar straight this time. Improvement noted, keep it that way." Yes, Master Chief. He moved on. The rest of the inspection unfolded with the same mechanical rhythm: praise for the bullies, punishment for the timid. It was all upside down, a world where silence was rewarded and compassion was weakness. When the inspection ended, Mueller gave his standard morning speech: "You represent the Navy. Excellence starts here," and dismissed them to the galley. The recruits moved in a blur of motion, filing out under the dull gray sky. As Diane walked across the asphalt grinder, the wind cut through her uniform. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the base was bathed in that pale half-light that made everything feel colder. Around her, cadets trudged in silence, eyes down, afraid to speak. This was supposed to be the birthplace of sailors. Instead, it felt like a prison yard. Kyle Anderson stood with his usual entourage near the galley doors, hands in pockets, grin lazy and dangerous. His eyes swept over the crowd like a man choosing his next victim. When he spotted Rachel, that grin widened. "Morning, Jensen," he called out, voice full of mock cheer. "Sleep well." Rachel said nothing, she just kept walking. Kyle took a half step forward, but Diane's presence near Rachel made him pause. He smirked. "Protecting your new friend, Miller. Careful, she's radioactive." Diane didn't respond. Her silence made him uneasy. She could see it in the slight twitch at the corner of his jaw. Bullies hated what they couldn't provoke. They entered the galley. Industrial smells, eggs, bacon, burnt toast, the kind of scent that stuck to uniforms and memories alike. Rachel sat alone again. Diane followed, ignoring the stares that came their way. For a few minutes, neither spoke. The noise of trays and metal utensils filled the space. Then Rachel's voice broke the quiet. "You shouldn't sit here. They'll make you pay for it." "Let them try," Diane said. Her tone was calm, but her eyes had that old, battle-hardened glint, the one that used to make generals hesitate before arguing with her. "How long has this been happening?" she asked again, softer now. Rachel hesitated, then said, "Since Kyle failed out of his own graduation cycle. He was supposed to be gone months ago, but Commander Lindström said he was leadership material. So they kept him around to help with discipline." Diane frowned. "Kept him around?" Rachel nodded. "They say he's mentoring us, but everyone knows it's just an excuse. He and his friends run the place after hours. Even the instructors stay out of their way." That explained it. The extended cycle, the unchecked authority, a sanctioned abuser wrapped in paperwork. Before Diane could ask more, a voice interrupted. "Seaman Recruit Miller." She looked up. Lieutenant Richardson stood a few feet away, tray in hand, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes, ma'am." "Join me, please." The recruits nearby pretended not to hear, but silence rippled through the tables all the same. Diane stood, nodded to Rachel, and followed Richardson to a small table near the window. They sat, neither spoke for a moment. The air between them was thick with things unsaid. Richardson finally leaned in, voice low. "You're not like the others." Diane kept her face blank. "Ma'am. The way you move, the way you watch, you don't flinch when you should, and you see things no one else does." Richardson's tone was quiet, but her eyes burned. "So I'll ask once, who are you really?" Diane studied her. The lieutenant couldn't have been more than 31, still young enough to believe in the system but old enough to have seen its cracks. There was exhaustion behind her sharpness and something else, hope maybe. "I'm no one special," Diane said. Richardson smiled faintly without humor. "If you say so, but let me tell you something, whoever you are, what's happening here isn't normal, and it's not new." Her fork clinked softly against her plate. "I've filed reports, documented incidents. Commander Lindström ignores them, says morale's high, performance metrics are good. But I've seen girls break in front of me, crying in showers, shaking during drills, and every time I try to help, I get warned about interfering with training objectives." She glanced around the galley, then back at Diane. Anderson's father is a retired Navy captain, friends in high places. That's why no one touches him. Diane felt her pulse steady, her breathing slow. Confirmation. The corruption reached higher than she'd thought. "What would you do," she asked quietly, "if you had proof?" Richardson's gaze sharpened. "Depends, proof of what?" "Everything," Diane said. "Hazing, retaliation, dereliction of duty, cover-ups." Richardson hesitated. "Then I'd burn this place to the ground." Before Diane could respond, a commotion erupted across the galley. Trays clattered, voices rose, chairs scraped back. Diane turned and saw Kyle Anderson towering over Rachel Jensen. His face was red with rage, his voice a bark. "You think you can talk about me, huh? Whisper your little lies." Rachel was frozen, eyes wide, fear radiating off her like heat. Amy Schultz stood beside her, trembling, defiant, blocking Kyle's path. "Leave her alone, Anderson." Kyle's grin returned, meaner this time. "You want a piece of it too." He picked up his tray. For one heartbeat, Diane thought no, he wouldn't. Then he did. The entire meal slammed down over Rachel's head. Meatloaf, potatoes, gravy, juice, a grotesque waterfall of humiliation. The sound that followed wasn't laughter, it was silence. A silence so sharp it cut through the room. Rachel didn't move. Food dripped down her face, pooling on the floor. Kyle stared at her for one long, self-satisfied moment, then spit, right onto the Navy insignia on her chest. The entire galley froze. Even the ceiling fan seemed to stop. Diane's breath caught in her throat. He hadn't just spit on a recruit. He spit on everything she stood for, everything she had bled for. Her chair scraped back hard. Richardson's hand shot out across the table, a warning. Their eyes met. "Not yet." The message was silent but clear. If Diane revealed herself now, she'd save one girl but lose the mission. Her hands trembled with fury, the kind she hadn't felt since combat, but she forced herself to stay seated, to breathe, to wait. Senior Chief Deborah Olson rushed over, voice sharp. "Cadet Anderson, step away." He did, smirking, the kind of smirk that said he knew nothing would happen. Commander Lindström arrived moments later, summoned by the commotion. He spoke to Olson, listened to Anderson's half-hearted excuse, and then said the words that made Diane's jaw clench until it hurt. "High spirits, nothing more." High spirits. A recruit had just been publicly humiliated, assaulted, and degraded in front of 200 witnesses, and the commanding officer called it high spirits. When Lindström left, the laughter returned in scattered bursts. Kyle's, Justin's, a few nervous chuckles from others too afraid not to join in. Rachel sat there trembling. Diane wanted to go to her, wanted to tear off the rank she wasn't wearing and remind them all what the uniform meant. But instead, she memorized every face, every word, every act. Richardson sat back down, her voice shaking with quiet anger. "That's it. That's why nothing changes. Because people like Lindström think protecting the system matters more than protecting dignity." "It will change," Diane said softly. "How?" Diane's eyes were calm again, but colder now. "Because I'm here." For the first time, Richardson looked truly shaken. Something in Diane's tone, the authority beneath the whisper, it didn't belong to any recruit. "I don't know who you are," Richardson said slowly, "but I believe you." They ate nothing, just sat there while the galley returned to its mechanical rhythm, pretending that nothing had happened. When the meal ended, Diane rose, carrying her tray to the return rack. She passed Kyle's table on the way. He didn't even glance at her. To him, she was still no one, a faceless recruit in an endless sea of insignificance. He had no idea he just spat on a fleet admiral's uniform. He had no idea his life, his freedom, his future were already over. Outside, the evening air was cold enough to sting. Diane walked across the grinder alone, the wind biting at her face. Above, the floodlights buzzed, washing the world in sterile light. She thought of Rachel's shaking hands, of the food sliding down that blue fabric, of the sound that wasn't laughter but collective cowardice. Something inside her shifted that night. She'd spent decades teaching that the Navy was a family, that discipline meant dignity, that honor meant something. But honor meant nothing here, not until someone took it back. She exhaled, steady, deliberate. 48 hours, she told herself. 48 hours to gather the last pieces of proof. Then she would burn the rot out of this place. She turned back toward the barracks, her face unreadable, her pace calm. But her eyes carried the promise of judgment. Not vengeance. Justice. And when it came, it would be absolute. How long could she stay silent? That question chased Diane through the thin dawn light, as if whispered by every flag snapping on the morning breeze. 48 hours. That was all she needed. 48 hours of pretending to be powerless while carrying the weight of an entire institution on her shoulders. The showers hissed in the barracks, a chorus of tired bodies scrubbing at grime and guilt. She stood under the lukewarm spray long before reveille, letting the water drum against her scars. The one on her shoulder from Kandahar, the long white line on her knee from the Gulf crash, evidence of survival she could never show. One slip of a towel, one curious glance, and her cover would vanish. She dried quickly, pulled on the same shapeless blue uniform, and watched her reflection in the fogged mirror. The face that looked back wasn't the fleet admiral who briefed Congress or commanded fleets across oceans. It was a ghost, hair cropped short, skin pale under fluorescent light, eyes dull by necessity. She whispered to her reflection, "Hold the line." When the lights flared and the whistle screamed through the barracks, chaos erupted again. Boots, belts, barking voices. Same routine, different tension. Something had changed overnight. Rachel's bunk was empty. Everyone noticed, no one asked. The absence hung in the air like a warning. Master Chief Muller's inspection was brisk, quieter than usual. His eyes lingered half a heartbeat too long on the vacant rack, then moved on. Diane watched him closely. The man looked older today, shoulders stooped, guilt eating through his discipline. He knew, he'd seen enough to know, and still he did nothing. Breakfast passed in murmurs and sideways glances. Even Kyle's laughter was forced, brittle at the edges. He still believed he was untouchable, but cracks were forming in the silence that protected him. Recruits kept their distance now, afraid of being next, or of being seen near him when the reckoning came. Across the galley, Lieutenant Richardson caught Diane's eye for the briefest moment. No smile, no nod, just that look urgent waited. A meeting would come soon. Diane could feel it. The day's schedule pinned them all to the confidence course. Mud, ropes, and exhaustion, a perfect cover for violence disguised as training. Diane moved with her assigned group, 10 recruits, including Amy Schultz, her bruised defiance visible even from a distance. Kyle's pack, Justin Bauer and Craig Hoffman, were stationed in the next rotation, close enough to watch. The air smelled of wet earth and rubber, orders barked, metal clanged. Confidence course, you fall, you crawl, Muller's voice cracked through the wind. The first obstacle, a 12-foot wall. Diane climbed third, pretending to struggle, hands slipping just enough to sell the act. She dropped lightly on the other side, mud splashing around her boots. Amy went next. Her anger made her fast, reckless. She cleared the top but landed wrong, ankle twisting, jaw tightening with pain. Muller noticed, did nothing. Then came Justin Bauer. He waited just long enough for Amy to limp ahead toward the cargonet crossing, then followed, smile curling in anticipation. Diane felt it before it happened, the pattern, the predator's timing. Her heartbeat slowed, years of instinct aligning like crosshairs. Amy was halfway across the net, struggling with her bad ankle, when Justin reached the midpoint below her and jerked the rope she held. A single motion, a deliberate yank. She slipped. The scream was short, the fall long enough for Diane to move. She sprinted, boots sinking into the mud, and caught Amy midair, twisting, rolling, taking the weight across her shoulder. They hit the pit in a splash of cold sludge. The world froze. For a second, no one moved. Then Mueller shouted, "Miller Schultz, report." Diane rose from the mud, Amy safe in her arms. "No injuries, Master Chief," she said evenly. She lost her grip. I was in position to break the fall. Mueller stared. He'd seen the control in her movement, the precision. No recruit moved like that. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Good situational awareness. And walked away. The recruits whispered among themselves. Amy stared at her, stunned. "That wasn't luck," she said under her breath. "You moved like someone who's done this before." Diane kept her voice flat. "Later, not here." They were sent to rinse off near the maintenance shed. The water was freezing. Mud streamed down their sleeves in brown rivers. Inside the small room that smelled of oil and soap, Amy turned to her. "You're not a recruit," she said quietly. "You can't be. No one reacts like that. Who are you?" For a long moment, Diane said nothing. Then she looked at the younger woman, face bruised, spirit unbroken, and made a choice. "I'm someone who's here to fix what's broken." Amy blinked. "You're investigating them." Diane nodded once. "And I need your help." Amy hesitated, only a heartbeat. "Whatever you need." "Keep your eyes open. Write down everything. Names, times, who was present. Don't confront them again. Not yet. We'll make it count when the time comes." Amy exhaled slowly. "You're going to take them down, aren't you?" "Yes," Diane said, "all of them." The words were quiet, but they carried the certainty of command. By noon, the rumor had already started spreading. The fall that should have broken bones hadn't. The new girl, Miller, had moved too fast, too sure. Whispers traveled faster than orders. When they returned to the barracks, Diane felt eyes follow her. Curiosity, fear, recognition. Her cover was fraying. She needed to move faster. At 1400 hours, she slipped away under the pretense of a medical errand and made her way toward the base hospital, a squat brick building on the far edge of the compound. The halls smelled of antiseptic and exhaustion. "Cadet Melissa Wagner," she told the corpsman at the desk. "I'm a friend." The man barely looked up. "Psych ward, 3rd floor, room 312. Upstairs, the corridor was quiet. Through the half-open door, she saw a girl sitting by the window, hospital gown pale against the light. 22, according to the file. She looked younger, eyes empty, hands twisting in her lap. "I'm not talking to another counselor," Melissa said without turning. "Save your pep talk." "I'm not a counselor," Diane said softly. "I'm here because what happened to you was wrong." Melissa looked over her shoulder, suspicion clouding her face. "Who sent you?" "No one you've met. I'm here to make it stop." She stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "You went to Commander Lindström. He failed you on a test you passed, then recycled you. 3 days later, you took the pills." Melissa's breath hitched. "How do you know that?" "Because I've been living it." For the first time, Melissa really looked at her. "You're not a recruit." "No," Diane said quietly. "I'm Fleet Admiral Diane Carpenter, and I came here to see the truth with my own eyes." Silence filled the room, thick with disbelief. "You're an admiral," Melissa whispered. Why would you do this?" "Because walking in with rank would have hidden the rot. They would have cleaned everything up for inspection, smiled for the cameras, and gone back to breaking people the next day. I needed to see the real Navy they'd built here." Melissa stared at her, tears gathering. "You can stop it." "I will, but I need you to tell me everything, every incident, every name." It took an hour, maybe more. Melissa talked until her voice trembled. The late-night inspections, the threats, the deliberate failures, the day she realized nobody in command would ever help her. Diane listened, every word becoming evidence, every tear another piece of truth. When Melissa finally stopped, she whispered, "I thought I was just weak." "You were strong enough to survive what would have destroyed most," Diane said. "Now help me make sure no one else goes through it." A knock interrupted them. The door opened and Lieutenant Richardson stepped inside. She froze when she saw them together. "Seaman Recruit Miller," she said carefully. "What are you?" "Lieutenant," Diane said, her voice carrying quiet authority that didn't match the uniform she wore. Richardson's eyes widened slightly. Understanding dawned. "You told her." "She deserved to know." The door clicked shut behind Richardson. The young officer took a slow breath. "I knew you weren't who you said you were, but an admiral." "Undercover assignment authorized by Admiral Donaldson," Diane said. "He'll be here in 36 hours for what's listed as a routine inspection. In reality, it's the beginning of a full inquiry." Richardson blinked. "You mean to expose it all," Diane said. "Lindström, Mueller, the cover-ups, everything." Richardson's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then you'll need allies. I'll testify. I have documentation, memos, emails, ignored reports. I've kept copies." Diane nodded. "Good, keep them safe. Tomorrow night I'll call for them." Melissa looked between them, a flicker of hope replacing the hollow stare. "You really think it'll work?" "It has to," Diane said. They spent the next 20 minutes building the outline of a plan. Witnesses, evidence, timing. When Diane finally stepped back into the hallway, the air felt lighter, but the weight on her chest doubled. She'd given these women hope. Failure was no longer an option. Outside, the sky had turned the color of steel. Wind howled across the grinder, carrying the scent of rain and oil. She walked back toward the barracks, boots echoing on concrete, mind racing with checklists and contingencies. At 16:30 hours, she reached Building 1405. A small crowd was gathered outside, voices tight with panic. She pushed through, saw Amy Schultz standing in the center, face bruised, lip split, uniform torn. Her breath caught. "What happened?" "They jumped me," Amy said, shaking. "Kyle, Craig, Justin waited for me after class, said it was payback." Diane turned to the nearest instructor, a petty officer named Harris. "You're going to report this." Harris looked uncomfortable. "Without witnesses or clear evidence, ma'am, recruit, there's not much I can." "Then escalate it," Diane snapped, voice cutting like a whip. "To Mueller, to Lindström, to anyone. Because if you bury this, you'll regret it." Something in her tone made him flinch. "Fine, I'll file it." He walked away, muttering. Amy touched her swollen cheek, winced. "He's not going to do anything, is he?" "No," Diane said, "but we will." She led Amy away from the crowd toward the maintenance shed again. Petty Officer Fisher was there, wiping grease from his hands. "Kev," Diane said, her voice low but firm, "we need a favor." He looked up, frowning at Amy's face. "What the hell happened?" "3 cadets assaulted her. I need proof." Fisher hesitated, eyes narrowing. "Security footage." "Exactly." He studied her. "You already know I don't have clearance for that. You're testing me." "Yes," Diane said simply. A long pause. Then Fisher sighed, turned to his desk and booted up an old computer. "Give me 20 minutes." The hum of machinery filled the small room. Amy sat on a crate, shivering with cold and fury. Diane watched Fisher's fingers fly across the keyboard, heard snippets of quiet calls, favors traded. Finally, he gestured them over. The grainy footage played on screen. A timestamp, a corner of the training field, Amy walking alone, then 3 shadows, Kyle grabbing her arms, Justin striking, a blur of motion. She hit the ground, they laughed and walked away. Fisher's jaw clenched. "There, that's your evidence." He burned the clip to a disk and handed it to Amy. Take this straight to Captain Peterson in military police. Don't go to Mueller or Lindström. They'll bury it. Amy clutched the disc like a lifeline. Thank you. Fisher looked at Diane. You're not a recruit. I don't know who you really are, but I can tell you this: whatever you're planning, make it count. I will, Diane said, and you'll be protected when this is over. They stepped back into the evening. The setting sun bled across the sky, streaking the clouds red and gold. Diane watched it for a long moment, the calm before the reckoning. She had everything now: testimony, allies, physical evidence. 36 hours until Admiral Donaldson arrived. 36 hours to hold the line. But as they walked toward the military police building, a cold certainty whispered at the edge of her thoughts. Men like Kyle Anderson didn't surrender quietly. And before this was over, someone else might still pay the price. Why did the shadows feel longer that night? Because the men who hid behind them were getting desperate. Because when power smells danger, it sharpens its claws. And because Diane was moving closer to the throat of the machine that had been feeding on the weak. The sun dropped low, a bruise of orange against the horizon, and the base took on that thin, brittle quiet that comes just before something breaks. Diane walked with Amy toward the military police office, boots tapping like a metronome, counting down the hours. The disc from Fisher burned a hole in Amy's pocket like a small, dangerous promise. Captain Sandra Peterson of the MPs had seen a lot of things in her years: drunken brawls, stolen equipment, quiet suicides. She had also seen cowardice disguised as procedure. When Amy slid the disc across the metal counter and told the clerk what had happened, Peterson didn't wait. Her face tightened. She smelled opportunity, and more importantly, she smelled culpability. "Bring her in," she said to the MP at the desk, "and get me Lieutenant Richardson's file." Diane watched from the corner, pretending to be a recruit awkwardly hovering. Inside, she felt a small, steady pulse of hope. Captain Peterson had the authority and temperament to act, but she also knew how fragile hope could be when met with institutional inertia. While Peterson started an immediate preliminary interview with Amy, she stepped outside and found Diane waiting under the cold lights. The captain's eyes were flat. "Who are you?" she asked. Not the question of a man looking for rank, more like the assessment of someone deciding whether to trust a stranger. "Someone who wants to end this," Diane said simply. Peterson studied her for a long second, then nodded once. "You've stirred a hornet's nest." "You mean Kyle," Diane said, "or the people who protect him?" "Both," Peterson said. "And you should know, if Lindström gets wind of an MP probe, he'll bury it. He's very good at burying things." Diane had already known that. That's why she'd been careful to hand the disc to Peterson, not to anyone on the training staff. But she also knew Lindström's reach. Connections have a way of acting like a chokehold, slow, suffocating. Inside the MP office, Amy's statement was recorded. The grainy disc played. Peterson watched, face closing like a fist. Then she looked at Diane with an intensity that felt almost like relief. "We'll open a restricted inquiry," she said. "You might be asked to provide testimony, and you should stay visible. If anyone retaliates, document it immediately." Diane nodded. Every action would be a puzzle piece. Every word would be evidence. That night, news traveled in the way it always did on bases, faster than emails, slower than gossip. Someone had given proof. Someone had finally put a face to the abuse. The division moved through its motions, but there was a different sort of quiet now, people keeping their heads down, many watching, fewer smiling. Kyle Anderson noticed the shift. He noticed when recruits whispered and threw him furtive glances. He noticed Richardson's eyes spending longer minutes looking toward the MP's building. Pride is a dangerous companion for cowards. When it senses danger, it escalates. Kyle talked to Craig and Justin in low voices near their bunks. The camera caught them in small, tense snapshots, unsteady laughter, furtive gestures. Diane watched from the shadows and cataloged everything. Their reactions told her as much as their actions. When predators smell exposure, they circle and plan. She slept poorly. Her dreams were full of barracks lights and the soft sound of Rachel's suppressed sobs. In the morning, she woke with a new decision lodged in her chest like a small, hard coin. You don't only observe, you protect. You do what is necessary. She couldn't be everywhere, but she could set a net. At breakfast, she took a calculated risk. She sat where she could see Kyle but not be attacked without witnesses. It was subtle theater, presence designed to deter. Small acts of protection, she had learned, matter. They let people know they aren't entirely alone. But caution had a price. Her movements were noticed. Master Chief Mueller looked at her longer than he should have. Not suspicion, something else. Recognition, perhaps, of competence he wished he had shown. His jaw tightened. His retirement date loomed like a scar of its own, making him brittle. He had been complicit by inaction. That knowledge eats at a man. The MP's restricted inquiry began that afternoon. Peterson called in a small team, interviewed witnesses in private rooms, and logged statements. She kept the file tightly controlled. No one on the training staff was to be informed yet. That secrecy was a lifeline. It was also a rumor engine. People smelled change and fear and hope in equal parts. Meanwhile, Lindström's shadow moved. He had a career to protect. He had reports to doctor, optics to manage, and alumni to reassure. He also had friends who would answer his call. At his desk, he rubbed his temple when a junior officer slid an internal memo across. It was about the MP activity. He frowned, then made a call. No need for alarm. High spirits, isolated incident. Maintain normal operations. That was how it started. Bureaucratic framing, the smallest of phrases to erase the sharp edges of reality. He didn't sleep well either. Men who build institutions on silence know, somewhere deep, that silence is brittle. When it breaks, the sound is catastrophic. By late afternoon, Amy left Peterson's office with instructions. Stay with the MPs for the night, don't return to the barracks without escort, and be prepared to give a detailed statement. She clutched the disc like a talisman. For Diane, that was a relief, but a small one. The bigger danger was always the ripple effect. Predators lash out when cornered. Around dusk, as Diane walked toward the maintenance shed to thank Fisher, Craig and Justin stepped from behind a service vehicle. They trailed him, just 2 steps behind, enough to make their presence known but not enough to start anything obvious. The message was clear: we're watching you. Diane slowed, adjusting her pace, offering them the empty courtesy of a recruit passing another. "Evening," she said. "Evening, Miller," Justin said, smiling like a man who believes his smile is armor. They passed. Nothing happened, nothing violent, but the air tasted metallic. Someone had dropped a stone into the water, the ripples were widening. Then the call came. Admiral Donaldson's visit had been moved up. He would arrive sooner than planned. 36 hours was down to 24. The timeline narrowed until each tick of the clock sounded like a small, urgent alarm. Diane felt the ground tilt beneath her. The evidence had to be airtight. The witnesses had to be ready. The chain of command had to be precisely corralled. Mistake was a luxury she could not afford. She convened a small, secret meeting in the maintenance shed that night. Amy, Melissa, Lieutenant Richardson, Petty Officer Fisher, and she, an unlikely council of damaged and determined people. Fisher had stacked crates in a loose circle. The overhead lamp threw long shadows and lenient light. Someone hammered out a rhythm on a toolbox. It sounded like a heartbeat. Diane laid out a plan with the cold efficiency of a woman whose decisions had to work on paper and in court. "We need direct links from victims to people in command," she said. "We need timelines, names, and corroboration. We need the video, the statements, and written evidence of prior complaints. Melissa, you'll give your recorded testimony to the MPs and you'll be escorted. Richardson, your memos and documented ignored reports, keep duplicates. Fisher, you gave us the disc. Hold nothing back. Amy, you'll be the first to testify about the assault." They nodded. The room hummed with the gravity of it. Courage, Diane knew, was not the absence of fear, it was action in spite of it. They spent hours rehearsing the order of things in hushed voices. Each witness practiced what they would say, how they would be called, where cross-examination might land. Preparation was armor, as necessary as any bulletproof vest. But plans on paper do not count for the human heart. There was anxiety threaded through every sentence. Amy's hands shook when she tapped her testimony into a phone. Melissa's eyes were hollow but steadier than the day before. Richardson's face betrayed the cost. Her career, if she testified, would be on the line. Fisher, who had kept mechanical order in a messy world, tapped his foot and said very little. Courage often dwells in the quiet. They left with a fragile sense of readiness. Diane walked back toward the barracks alone. The sky had gone black. The base lights hummed like a watchful animal. Somewhere a dog barked. A shadow detached itself from the darkness behind the maintenance building. Kyle, close enough now to be dangerous. He stepped into the lamp light, grinned thin. Craig and Justin behind him like cloned threats. "So you're the hero," he said. "The one who caught Amy, the new recruit who thinks she's special." His tone was mocking, but it carried something else, a promise. Diane could have revealed herself then. A simple step, a toss of a hair, a salute. She had the rank, the voice, the authority to end this right there. But exposure would also scatter evidence, spook witnesses, and give Lindström time to bury files. So she chose another path, the one that would hurt him the most without a single raised voice. She looked at him with a patience he did not understand. "You should be careful," she said quietly. "You're the one who got recorded." He laughed, but it was brittle. "What are you gonna do about it?" "Everything," she said, "and you'll be the first example." The words landed like a clean promise. He stepped back, anger simmering. "We'll see about that." That night Diane lay awake and thought about mercy and justice, about when to strike and when to wait. She had trained men to face death without flinching. The calculus of writing an institution felt like a smarter, slower war. She felt proud, anxious, determined, an odd braid of emotions that made her hands tremble when she checked her notes. And underneath it all, a small, private sorrow. For the recruits who had already been broken, Melissa in a hospital bed, Rachel who had vanished from her bunk, girls who had swallowed shame like bitter pills. The cost of correction would include their stories. It would not take away what had been done, but it could prevent the next tragedy. Diane whispered into the dark to no one and everyone, "They think silence protects them. It won't." Somewhere beyond the fence, Admiral Donaldson's jet sliced the night air, carrying a man who had authorized this investigation and who would, if Diane's plan held, observe the first stages of the unmaking of a small, poisoned empire. She closed her eyes and pictured the next day. MPs coordinating interviews, witnesses ready, Lindström cornered. She imagined Kyle's face when the truth landed. She imagined the raw, terrible relief on Melissa's face when the system finally did what it was supposed to do. The next morning would come like a blade, and she, who had chosen to be patient instead of triumphant, would be ready to act. Sometimes courage is loud. Sometimes it's a quiet preparation in the dark, assembling the pieces, aligning the facts, and waiting for a precise moment to change everything. Diane's breath slowed. Hope and strategy held her in equal parts. She rose from her bunk before reveille, took one last look at the empty rack where Rachel had been, and tightened the knot in her duty belt. The reckoning was near. She walked into the pale morning like an ordinary recruit with an extraordinary burden. And like always, her eyes were watching, cataloging, deciding. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout. It arranges itself into action. Why did the base feel too quiet that morning? Because silence in a military compound isn't peace, it's pressure. The kind that builds under steel until something gives. The sun was barely up when Diane stepped out of barracks 1405. Her boots met the asphalt with deliberate calm, but inside, her pulse beat to a different rhythm, steady, alert, ready. 20 hours. That's all she had left until Admiral Donaldson's arrival. 20 hours to make sure the truth didn't get buried again. She crossed the grinder, where rows of recruits stood at rigid attention, fog curling around their legs like smoke. Master Chief Mueller paced before them, clipboard in hand. His voice was rough, slower than usual. Guilt hung on him like an old uniform he couldn't take off. When he barked division, forward march, Diane fell in line, second row from the back. She learned how to disappear inside the rhythm of footsteps, but her eyes never stopped moving. Kyle Anderson marched 3 files over, his jaw tight, movements jerky. The swagger was gone. Fear had crept in just enough for her to see it. That's what truth does when it starts closing in. It makes predators sweat. They reached the training grounds. Routine drills, push-ups, crawls, obstacle walls, everything looked normal, but it was. The whole base was holding its breath. The MPs were moving quietly, Diane had made sure of it. Captain Peterson had begun interviews at dawn. Amy's statement, Melissa's video, Richardson's reports. The file was thickening like storm clouds. Still, Diane knew how fast power could rewrite facts. All it took was one superior officer with enough leverage and a single word, classified. She couldn't let that happen. When the morning drill ended, she wiped her hands on her trousers and caught Richardson's eye near the field office. The young lieutenant nodded, a signal. Progress. Inside the office, Peterson's team was gathered around a table, folders open, expressions grave. Admiral, Richardson greeted quietly once the door closed. The word hung between them, spoken softly enough not to echo. Diane took the folder from Peterson. Photos, transcripts, testimonies, the beginnings of accountability. This, Peterson said, is more than hazing. It's systemic coercion. Recruits threatened into silence, falsified evaluations, medical neglect. Lindström's fingerprints are everywhere. Diane studied each page, and Kyle Anderson. Peterson's mouth twisted, still free, still walking around like he owns the place. But when this goes up the chain, he won't be for long. Richardson hesitated. Ma'am, if I may, I'm worried. The moment word gets to Lindström, he'll retaliate. You know that, right? I do, Diane said softly. That's why we act before he knows what's coming. Her plan had been simple, quiet, surgical. Gather evidence, hold it tight, deliver it directly to Admiral Donaldson. But there's a truth in every operation. No plan survives contact with fear, and fear was spreading fast. By 1100 hours, whispers had reached even the lowest ranks. Something was coming, something big. Kyle felt it too. He cornered Justin and Craig behind the supply hangar, voice low, dangerous. They're trying to screw me. That recruit, Miller, she's the one. She's behind all of it. Craig frowned. You sure? What if it's that lieutenant? No, Kyle snapped. She's too clean, but Miller, she's different. You've seen her. The way she moves, the way people look at her. She's no damn recruit. He wasn't wrong. Instinct makes predators recognize hunters, even disguised ones. That afternoon, during small unit tactics training, Diane felt the shift. Kyle's eyes were on her, watching, waiting, the subtle choreography of suspicion. When they broke for water, he approached, slow, casual, lethal in intent. Funny thing, he said, stepping closer. I heard MPs are sniffing around, some big investigation. Maybe they found something worth finding, Diane said, voice even. Maybe, he replied, but you know how it goes, snitches don't last long here. The words were quiet, almost a whisper, but the message was clear. She didn't blink, neither do cowards. Their eyes locked, his full of anger, hers full of calm. He didn't understand it, that steadiness. It unnerved him. He smirked to hide it, tossed his canteen aside and walked away. That was the first warning. The second came an hour later. Diane returned to her bunk after drills and found her locker open. Not broken, opened. Everything inside tossed, uniform shredded, her name tag missing. Amy's gasp echoed down the row. They went through your stuff. Diane's eyes scanned the damage. No, they went through my identity. Because whoever did this wasn't just trying to intimidate her. They were searching for proof, for something that explained who she really was. She kept her voice level. Get Peterson quietly. Amy nodded and slipped out. Diane sat on the edge of her bunk, running through possibilities. Only a few people knew her cover: Peterson, Richardson, Fisher. None of them would leak, which meant Lindström was sniffing around and Kyle was his hound. Minutes later, Peterson entered, flanked by an MP sergeant. We've got surveillance outside the barracks, she whispered. We'll check the footage. You okay? I'm fine, Diane said. But if they're desperate enough to search, they're desperate enough to destroy evidence. Then we secure it now. The three of them moved like ghosts through the corridors. Richardson met them at the admin wing with a USB drive, her copy of the memos. Lindström's assistant asked for access to my office this morning, she said. I locked the files and claimed a system failure. We're running out of time. Peterson exhaled. He knows. Then it's begun, Diane said quietly. By dusk, the investigation was no longer secret. Lindström called a base-wide compliance meeting, his version of a counterstrike. All staff, all recruits, parade ground 1800 hours. He stood on the platform under floodlights, face composed, voice even. Rumors, he began, are the disease of discipline. I've heard whispers of misconduct, of baseless accusations meant to tarnish the Navy's integrity. I won't allow it. Anyone found spreading lies will face immediate dismissal. The words were crafted, polished, poisonous. Diane stood among the recruits, expression unreadable. Amy stood beside her, fists clenched. The crowd was still, too still. Fear was thick enough to taste. Then Lindström's eyes found her, just for a second. It wasn't recognition, not yet, but it was curiosity. That was worse. She looked away first, a strategic retreat. That night the rain came, not the soft kind, the hard, sideways kind that soaked through uniforms and turned gravel into rivers. In her bunk, Diane packed her notebook and flash drive, sliding them into a waterproof pouch. Evidence, names, time stamps, the final pieces. A sound outside made her pause, footsteps, then a whisper, then silence. She turned off her light, waited. A shadow moved by her window, tall, broad-shouldered. Kyle. Her body tensed, ready. The door creaked open, and for the first time in years, Diane felt the raw thrill of combat anticipation. Not the kind born of battlefields, but the quieter, sharper kind born of conscience. He slipped inside, rain dripping from his sleeves. He thought she was asleep. She was. Looking for something. Her voice cut through the dark like steel. Kyle froze. The small reading lamp flicked on, bathing the room in dim light. Diane stood there, calm, deliberate. He laughed low, nervous. Didn't mean to startle you, just checking on my favorite recruit. Your concern is noted, she said. Now leave. He stepped closer, too close. You think you're safe because the MPs are here. They don't stay, I do. Her eyes never left his, and yet you're the one shaking. For a moment he said nothing. Then he smirked, forced and thin, and backed toward the door. You'll regret this, he said. Already have, she replied. He left, but not before glancing at her locker, the smallest tell. He'd been looking for the pouch, the evidence. When the door closed, Diane exhaled, slow and quiet. The rain masked her heartbeat, but not her resolve. By morning it would all be over, one way or another. She met with Richardson and Peterson before sunrise in the MP office. The air was heavy with coffee and exhaustion. Donaldson lands at 900, Peterson said. He's requested a closed briefing, just us. Perfect, Diane said. We'll hand him everything. But as she spoke, the radio on Peterson's desk crackled. Base control to MP command. Admiral Donaldson's flight delayed due to weather. New ETA 1600 hours. 4 extra hours. 4 hours for Lindström to act. They looked at each other, the silence between them more dangerous than words. Richardson whispered, "He's going to destroy the files." "Then we get them first," Diane said. She checked her watch. Then the clouds rolling in over Lake Michigan, dark, swollen, electric. The storm wasn't over the base yet, but it was coming. And when it hit, it wouldn't be rain that fell. It would be truth. Why did the rain stop just before dawn? Because storms know when to hold their breath. Because some tempests begin not in clouds but in people. By 600, the entire base seemed suspended between silence and collapse. The air smelled of wet asphalt and diesel. The wind carried the metallic taste of something waiting to happen. Inside the MP office, Admiral Diane Carpenter, still recruit Miller to most, stood with Captain Peterson and Lieutenant Richardson around a single metal table. On it lay every truth they'd risked their lives to gather. Testimony transcripts, medical records, ignored complaints, a copy of the surveillance footage. A mountain of shame wrapped in manila folders. "Donaldson's plane touches down at 1600, Peterson said, eyes darting to the wall clock. "That gives us 10 hours to hold this evidence uncorrupted and keep our witnesses alive." "Alive?" Richardson asked quietly. Peterson didn't answer. She didn't need to. Diane placed a steady hand on the pile. "We moved the originals off-site. Fisher has access to the external storage server used for engineering schematics. It's isolated from Lindström systems." Peterson nodded. "Smart, untraceable without physical access." "Then that's our lifeline," Diane said. "We protect it with everything we've got." They didn't know that across the compound, Commander Eric Lindström was already moving his pieces. In his office, blinds half-drawn, he stared at a message flashing on his secure terminal. "MPs collected evidence. Possible higher inquiry. Destroy all related documents." It wasn't an order. It was survival. He'd spent his career curating the illusion of order, hiding dysfunction behind polished reports and patriotic speeches. He wasn't going to lose that to one anonymous recruit and her noisy supporters. "Chief Mueller," he called through the intercom, voice clipped. "Bring me Kyle Anderson now." Mueller hesitated for a fraction of a second. That hesitation meant more than words ever could. But then he said, "Yes, sir." Within minutes, Kyle stood before Lindström's desk, uniform damp, eyes hard. "I hear the MPs are sniffing around," Lindström began. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Kyle swallowed. "No, sir, just rumors." "Rumors don't start themselves," Lindström said. He studied the young man, cocky once, now trembling beneath the weight of something he couldn't name. "Do you know Recruit Miller?" Kyle froze. "Yes, sir." "I thought so." Lindström leaned back. "She's not who she says she is." Kyle blinked. "What do you mean?" "Let's call her a problem," Lindström said. "One we need to handle quietly." The boy's confusion twisted into anger. "You want me to scare her?" Lindström's eyes were cold. "I want her to disappear, temporarily, before the Admiral arrives." Silence, then a small nod. "Understood, sir." It was a deal with a devil who wore medals. By 900, the sky had turned lead gray again. The kind of morning that pressed on your chest and made the whole world sound like static. Diane and Richardson made their way toward the data center on the far edge of the compound. Fisher was already there, hunched over a flickering monitor, cigarette dangling from his lips despite regulations. "Servers ready," he said. "Encrypted channel, offline storage. Once I upload this, not even God could delete it." "Then do it," Diane said. He inserted the drive. The screen filled with file names, testimony a Jensen, MP4, report incident 144, Lindström memo 7. Uploading 3%. The progress bar crawled like a fuse. Outside, thunder grumbled faintly. At 6%, the lights flickered. Fisher frowned. That's not weather, that's interference. From where? Richardson asked. He typed fast. Main server line being rerouted. Someone's pulling our network traffic through the command hub. Lindström, Diane muttered. The upload froze at 9%. Fisher swore under his breath. He's throttling bandwidth. If he gets access, he'll trace this and fry it remotely. Then we pull it manual, Diane said. Transfer to external drive and move it out of the building. Fisher's hands flew. He yanked out the drive, sealed it in an anti-static pouch, and handed it to her. You're holding a bomb, Admiral. She slipped it into her jacket. Then let's hope it explodes in the right direction. They left through the back door, moving through sheets of drizzle toward Peterson's office. Every shadow looked alive. Every passing face, a question of loyalty. Halfway across the compound, a voice rang out behind them. Recruit Miller. Diane turned. Kyle stood 20 feet away, uniform immaculate, expression controlled. Too controlled. Commander Lindström wants to see you, he said. Richardson's jaw tightened. That's convenient. Diane looked him over. I'm busy. Kyle smiled thinly. Didn't sound like a request. Her mind ran the calculus in seconds. Refusing could break her cover prematurely. Accepting could spring a trap. She handed the pouch to Richardson. Deliver this to Captain Peterson, personally. Ma'am. That's an order, Lieutenant. Richardson hesitated, then nodded and slipped away. Diane turned back to Kyle. Lead the way. Lindström's office smelled of coffee and arrogance. He stood behind his desk, hands clasped behind his back, the faintest smile on his lips. Miller, he said, you've been busy. Just following instructions, sir. He studied her for a long moment, eyes narrowing. You remind me of someone a bit older, decorated, Admiral Carpenter perhaps. Diane didn't move, never met her. Of course not. He circled her like a shark testing boundaries. Still, interesting coincidence. A woman shows up under an alias, starts stirring trouble the week an Admiral schedules an inspection. You can see why I'm curious. I just want to serve, sir. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. You've served enough. She saw the shift a second before it happened. The subtle hand signaled toward the door. 2 security officers stepped in. Escort recruit Miller to holding. She's under investigation for theft and falsifying identification. Diane met his gaze. You're making a mistake. No, he said. I'm preserving order. As they grabbed her arms, she didn't resist. The cuffs clicked cold around her wrists. She let them take her. Sometimes control means letting the enemy think he's won. As she was led out, she caught sight of Kyle standing in the hall. His grin was back. Told you, Miller, snitches don't last long. She looked at him with calm detachment. You're right, she said. They outlast the cowards. The holding cell was small, concrete, windowless. A camera blinked red in the corner. She sat on the cot, wrists bruised from the cuffs. Minutes became hours. At 1300, footsteps approached. The door opened. Lieutenant Richardson slipped inside, eyes blazing. He's deleting everything, every digital record. Fisher's been detained. Peterson's office was searched. He's covering tracks fast. Did you secure the external drive? I did. Peterson's guarding it personally, but he's ordered base lockdown. MPs are grounded until Donaldson arrives. Diane nodded slowly. Then we wait and survive the next 3 hours. Survive, Richardson whispered. You think men like Lindström leave loose ends? Before Richardson could answer, the door flew open. Kyle stood there, flanked by 2 guards. Commander wants her transferred to main HQ for questioning, he said. Richardson stepped forward. Under whose authority? Mine, Lindström's voice echoed from the hall. Stand down, Lieutenant. Richardson didn't move. With respect, sir, procedure requires written authorization. Are you refusing an order? Diane rose slowly. It's fine, Lieutenant, I'll go. Their eyes met. A silent code passed between them. Trust the plan. She followed Kyle and the guards down the hallway. Her boots echoed against the floor like a slow march to judgment. Outside, thunder rolled again. The rain had returned, heavier, angrier. As they approached the vehicle bay, she saw the black SUV idling, windows tinted, engine humming. "Where are we going?" she asked. Kyle smirked. "Someplace quiet." He opened the door, motioned her in. And that's when everything shifted. A shout from behind, "Stand down." MPs stormed the bay, rifles raised. Peterson at the front, rain plastering her hair to her face. Richardson beside her, soaked and furious. "Step away from her," Peterson barked. Kyle froze. "She's under the protection of the United States Navy," Peterson cut in. "Admiral Donaldson's orders." Lindström appeared at the far end of the hangar, fury carved into his features. "What is this nonsense?" Peterson handed him a paper. "Direct communication from Naval Command. Admiral Carpenter's undercover status is hereby declassified, effective immediately." Silence. Diane stepped forward, the cuffs still on her wrists. "You wanted to meet Admiral Carpenter, Commander. Here I am." Lindström's face drained of color. "You." She raised her bound hands. "You had a choice. Protect your recruits or protect your ego. You chose wrong." Peterson motioned, and a guard stepped forward, unlocking the cuffs. The sound was soft, a metallic click, but it might as well have been thunder. Diane rubbed her wrists, eyes never leaving Lindström. "You've spent years hiding behind procedure, silencing the broken, calling cruelty discipline. It ends now." Lindström's voice cracked. "You'll destroy everything I've built." "No," Diane said. "I'll rebuild what you ruined." Outside, the wind howled through the open bay doors. Rain blew in, scattering papers, blurring the edges of the moment until it felt cinematic, surreal. "Commander Eric Lindström," Peterson said formally, "you are relieved of duty pending investigation for gross misconduct, falsification of records, and violation of Federal Code 847. The words struck like artillery. Kyle tried to back away, but two MPs caught his arms. "Wait, this isn't." "You'll have your say in court," Peterson said coldly. Diane turned to him, her voice quieter now. "Rachel Jensen, Amy Schultz, Melissa Wagner, remember those names, because they'll be the reason you'll never wear this uniform again." He lowered his head, no smirk this time. As Lindström was led away, the storm broke fully, wind, water, thunder merging into chaos. The sound was almost purifying. Diane stepped outside, rain soaking her uniform, washing mud and memory away. Richardson joined her under the gray sky. "You didn't just expose a commander," she said softly. "You exposed the system." Diane looked out across the flooded grinder, recruits standing motionless in the downpour. "Then we start fixing it." Richardson nodded. "What happens now?" "Donaldson lands in 2 hours," Diane said. "And when he does, I'll hand him everything. But after that," she looked toward the barracks where windows glowed faintly through the rain. "After that, I'm going to find Rachel." Richardson blinked. "You think she's still alive?" Diane's expression hardened. "I have to." The wind carried her words into the storm. "Because even justice isn't complete without redemption." And she wasn't done yet. Why did her hands still tremble, even after it was over? Because justice doesn't erase the weight of what it costs. It only shifts it. Rain hammered against the roof of the MP building, steady, relentless. Inside, the compound was a blur of flashing lights, soaked uniforms, shouted orders. Commander Lindström was in custody. Kyle and his friends were cuffed, their arrogance dissolved into panic. The system that had protected them was collapsing, and everyone could feel it. But for Diane Carpenter, the storm outside was quieter than the one inside her. She stood by the window, rain tracing crooked paths down the glass. Her reflection looked older than it had that morning. A woman carved by consequence. Her uniform, still damp from the hanger, clung to her shoulders. Around her, officers moved briskly, collecting files, sealing evidence, writing statements. But the Admiral's eyes were far away. She wasn't thinking about Lindström, not anymore. She was thinking about Rachel. The bunk that had been stripped, the photograph cracked, the silence no one dared explain. She turned to Lieutenant Richardson. Any word on her yet? Richardson shook her head. Nothing on the base. Personnel records say she was transferred to medical leave 3 days ago. No destination listed. Medical leave, Diane repeated softly, or disappearance. Richardson hesitated. There's something else. Fisher found a deleted internal memo. It mentioned a disciplinary discharge signed by Lindström himself. No reason given, no follow-up. Diane exhaled slowly. Then she didn't leave, she was erased. The words sat heavy between them. Peterson approached from across the room, clipboard in hand. Admiral Donaldson's plane just landed. He's en route. Good, Diane said, but her voice was distant. Keep the evidence secure. I'll debrief him personally, but before that, give me access to the old administrative archives. I want to see every record Lindström ever buried. Peterson frowned. Ma'am, with all respect, you haven't slept in 2 days. I'll sleep when every name is accounted for, Diane said. Her tone left no room for argument. The archive room was tucked beneath the command offices, behind a steel door marked personnel records, restricted access. The air was dry, recycled, tinged with dust and old ink. Rows of file cabinets stretched out like grave markers, each drawer labeled with unit numbers and dates. The lights flickered faintly, old wiring, long neglected. Richardson stood beside her, holding a flashlight. Where do we start? Lindström's tenure began 5 years ago, Diane said. Start there. Any sudden discharges, suicides, unexplained transfers, pull them. For an hour, the only sounds were drawers sliding, papers rustling, the hum of electricity above. The flashlight beam darted across names, each one a life reduced to a line of ink. Then Richardson stopped. Ma'am. She handed Diane a thin folder, its edges water-stained, label half-torn. Jensen, Rachel Ann. Diane opened it carefully. Inside, 2 sheets. One was a disciplinary notice for failure to comply with conduct standards. The second, a discharge authorization. Signed, stamped. No medical documentation, no exit interview, no forwarding address. Nothing else? Diane asked. Just this, Richardson said. No physical file, no digital record, it's like she vanished. Diane stared at the paper until the letters blurred. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but edged with something raw. He buried her alive in paperwork. Richardson swallowed hard. What do we do? Diane slipped the folder under her arm. We find her. Admiral Donaldson arrived like the eye of a hurricane, calm, direct, efficient. His convoy rolled through the flooded gates, lights flashing against the gray sky. He entered the MP command office, rain dripping from his coat. Diane, he said, greeting her not as a subordinate but as a soldier who'd seen too much of the same war. I got your message. You did what needed doing. She nodded. It's only half done, sir. Donaldson scanned the evidence table. You've built a solid case. Command won't be able to bury this. Lindström's finished. I'm not here for his career, Diane said. I'm here for the people he broke. Donaldson's expression softened. You always were. He placed a hand on her shoulder. I'll take it from here. Go get some rest. But she shook her head. One recruit's missing, Rachel Jensen. I won't stop until I know what happened to her. Donaldson hesitated. That's not your job anymore. It's my responsibility, she said. Something in her tone silenced him. He nodded once. Then take what you need, find her. The next 48 hours blurred into a hunt. Richardson and Fisher combed through base communications, flagging deleted transmissions. Peterson coordinated with civilian agencies near Chicago. Diane drove through the rain for hours, hospital to hospital, clinic to shelter, carrying Rachel's photo folded in her pocket. Everywhere she went, she met polite confusion. No one remembered a girl named Rachel Jensen. No records, no trail. Until the third day. A nurse at a veterans outreach center in Waukegan paused when Diane showed the photo. "Wait, that's her. Came in about a week ago. Said she was discharged early. Looked like she'd been through hell. Stayed one night, then left. Didn't say where." Diane's pulse quickened. Did she say why she left the Navy? The nurse frowned. Said something about being told she wasn't cut out for it, but I didn't believe her. There was steel in that girl, the kind that doesn't go away easy. Diane closed her eyes. "Thank you." Back in the car, she sat for a long time before turning the key. The rain had stopped. The world was quiet again. She followed the shoreline road north, the gray water stretching endless beside her. Somewhere along that coast, Rachel was out there, wounded, lost, maybe trying to forget. But Diane knew something about ghosts. They don't stay gone until someone lets them go. Night fell by the time she found the small diner off Highway 137. Neon light flickered weakly through the fogged windows. Inside, a handful of truckers drank coffee. A waitress wiped down the counter. And in the back corner, a young woman sat alone, hood up, staring at a mug gone cold. Diane stopped in the doorway, heart tightening. Rachel Jensen looked thinner. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her cup, but it was her eyes, still defiant, still alive, that confirmed it. Diane approached quietly, seat taken. Rachel looked up, startled. For a moment she didn't recognize her. Then she did. "You," she whispered. "Me." Rachel's mouth trembled. "They said you were arrested, that you." "They said a lot of things." Diane sat across from her. "None of them true anymore." Rachel blinked hard, like trying to wake up. Lindström, he told me I failed, said I was a disgrace. They sent me home with nothing." "I know," Diane said softly. "And I came to tell you it wasn't your failure, it was theirs." Rachel's breath hitched. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," Diane interrupted gently. "Because they took something from you that doesn't belong to them. Your pride, your name. I can't give you back time, but I can make sure your story's heard." Tears welled in Rachel's eyes, but she shook her head. What difference would it make? People like him always win. Diane leaned forward. "Not this time. He's gone, arrested. His whole command is under investigation. The Navy knows your name again." For a long time, Rachel didn't speak. Then her hand went to her mouth as if holding in a sob. "You really did it." Diane nodded. "We did it." The waitress approached. "Refill." Rachel managed a small smile. "Yeah, please." When she walked away, Diane reached into her coat and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "That's an official reinstatement offer, and an apology letter from the Chief of Naval Personnel." Rachel stared at it. "You how?" Diane smiled faintly. "You're tougher than half the officers I've trained. The Navy needs people like you, the right kind of people." Rachel's voice broke. "Why did you care so much?" Diane looked down at her hands, the small scars that mapped decades of command and loss. "Because once, I had a commander who looked the other way, and a girl under my command paid for it. I promised myself I'd never let that happen again." Silence filled the space between them, heavy, healing. Rachel wiped her eyes. "What if I'm not ready?" "Then you heal first," Diane said. "And when you are ready, come back. The door will still be open." Rachel nodded slowly, like she was believing for the first time that something could be fixed. Outside, dawn began to lighten the horizon. The storm had passed. Hours later, back at Great Lakes, Diane stood on the pier watching the sunrise burn through the fog. The base was quiet now. MPs gone, recruits back in training, order restored but different, cleaner. Richardson joined her, 2 coffees in hand. She'll be okay. She's strong, Diane said. She just needed someone to remind her. They stood in silence for a while, the gulls calling overhead, the water lapping against the docks. Richardson finally said, "You think they'll remember what you did here?" Diane smiled faintly. "I don't care if they remember me. I care that they remember her." The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of salt and engine oil, the smell of service, of duty, of beginnings. "Sometimes," Diane said quietly, "justice doesn't roar, it whispers, it rebuilds, one person at a time." She looked out across the endless blue, where the sky met the lake in a line so thin it almost disappeared. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak," she murmured. "It simply acts." The light caught her face, soft and gold, washing away the last of the shadows. And for the first time in a long time, Admiral Diane Carpenter let herself breathe. Why did she linger on the pier long after sunrise? Because endings never come all at once. They arrive in pieces, quiet moments, unfinished thoughts, and the slow unclenching of hands that have fought too long. The lake stretched endless before her, a vast mirror of gray and gold. Diane Carpenter stood at its edge, the wind threading through her hair, uniform collar turned up against the chill. For the first time in weeks, she could hear her own heartbeat instead of marching orders or shouted commands. The investigation was over, the arrests were made. The Navy would spin it as a triumph of accountability, a system correcting itself. But she knew better. This wasn't a clean victory. It was a wound dressed in ceremony. Still, it was something, and that had to be enough. Behind her, the soft thud of approaching boots broke the stillness. She didn't turn. "Permission to speak freely, Admiral." It was Richardson. The young lieutenant's voice carried that mix of reverence and familiarity that came only after shared fire. "Always," Diane said. Richardson came to stand beside her, coffee in hand, eyes on the horizon. "Donaldson's back in D.C. He's already briefing the Joint Committee. The investigation's going public. They're calling it the Great Lakes Scandal." Diane's lips curved faintly. "They'll call it something cleaner soon. They always do." Richardson took a sip, hesitated. "And you, what happens now?" "Now," Diane said, "I write my report. Then I disappear again." "Disappearing doesn't suit you." "It suits the mission," Diane replied. "The less they see of me, the more they'll focus on what needs fixing." Richardson looked at her, brow furrowed. "You could take a desk in D.C. You've earned that." Diane smiled faintly. "Desks don't save lives." For a long moment, they watched the light ripple across the water. Then Richardson asked the question she'd been holding back. "Why go undercover, Admiral? You could have exposed them from the top." Diane didn't answer immediately. The wind tugged at her jacket, and somewhere out on the water, a bell buoy tolled softly. "When you sit in a room long enough," she said at last, "people start lying to you. They polish their words, shape their truths. I needed to see the Navy I built, the real one. Not the reports, not the numbers, the people, the fear, the cracks." She paused. "Turns out the cracks were bigger than I thought." Richardson nodded, quiet. "But you filled them." "No," Diane said softly. "I just made them visible." By noon, she was back in the administrative office where it had all started. The same gray walls, the same buzzing fluorescent lights. Only now there was no shouting, no posturing, no arrogance. Just work. Real work. Amy Schultz sat at one desk, typing a report with focus and quiet determination. Her bruises had faded, but the steel in her eyes hadn't. Peterson was in another room, fielding calls from Naval Command. Fisher was reviewing maintenance logs, now officially reinstated as head engineer. The base felt different. Not fixed, but healing. When Diane entered, the room stilled. Amy stood, unsure whether to salute or hug her. "Ma'am," she said finally, voice steady. "Rachel called. She's doing okay. Said to tell you she's thinking about coming back. Diane's chest tightened. Good, tell her I said the door's open. Yes, ma'am. Amy hesitated, then added, she also said she didn't think anyone would ever stand up for her again, until you did. Diane's gaze softened. Then she should know she did the same for others. Amy blinked. What do you mean? Courage spreads, Diane said. Sometimes it starts with just one person refusing to look away. Amy smiled faintly. Guess that makes two of us. The words caught Diane off guard. Pride warmed her, quiet and clean. She nodded. Carry it forward, cadet, that's all I ask. The debrief room was colder than she remembered. Admiral Donaldson sat at the head of the table, surrounded by senior officers and legal counsel. Papers were stacked neatly before each seat. Admiral Carpenter, Donaldson began, you've concluded your undercover assessment of Naval Station Great Lakes. Your findings confirm widespread misconduct, dereliction of duty, and systemic moral failure within the chain of command. Is that your official statement? Yes, sir. Do you have recommendations for corrective action? I do. Diane slid a folder forward. Revise the evaluation system, end recycled hazing programs, establish a psychological oversight unit on every training base. And she hesitated, teach leadership again. Real leadership, not control, not intimidation, the kind that listens. One of the board members, a man with too many ribbons and too little empathy, cleared his throat. Admiral Carpenter, some might say your methods were unconventional, going undercover, falsifying identity. They were necessary, Diane interrupted. Her tone was calm, but the room quieted instantly. The Navy is built on truth, but truth can't survive in comfort. I went where comfort ends. Silence. Donaldson leaned back, eyes glinting. And if you were asked to do it again? Diane's answer came without hesitation. I would. He nodded once. That's all I needed to hear. The rest of the meeting blurred, formalities, signatures, acknowledgments. When it ended, the board filed out, murmuring behind closed doors. Donaldson lingered. You did more than anyone expected, Diane, he said quietly. You didn't just expose corruption. You reminded us what the uniform means. She smiled faintly. Let's make sure it keeps meaning something. He extended his hand. She took it. Go home, he said. You've earned it. But she knew home wasn't a place. It was peace. And peace for her always came last. The sky was amber by the time she walked the length of the pier again. The water was calm now, as if the lake itself had been watching and was finally at ease. She stopped near the end, where the metal rail was still slick from rain. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the water, part soldier, part ghost. From her pocket, she pulled a small silver pin, her Fleet Admiral insignia, the one she hadn't worn since the day she put on a recruit's uniform. For weeks it had been just metal. Now it felt heavier, realer, a reminder of who she was and why she'd had to become someone else. She turned it over in her palm, then fastened it back onto her jacket, not as a symbol of rank but of responsibility. Footsteps approached again. Amy running slightly, breath visible in the cold air. Ma'am, the press, they're asking for a statement. Diane smiled. Then give them one. Me? Yes, Diane said, turning toward the horizon. Tell them what you saw, tell them what it felt like, tell them what it cost. Amy's voice softened. What should I say about you? Diane looked back at her, eyes calm, steady. Say I was there, nothing more. Amy nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. She ran off and Diane watched her go, young, determined, unbroken. The kind of soldier the Navy should have been building all along. The kind who didn't need saving anymore. As twilight bled into night, Diane stayed on the pier. The base lights flickered on one by one, reflecting across the water like scattered stars. She thought of all the faces, Rachel's trembling defiance, Amy's stubborn courage, Melissa's quiet strength. The ones who stayed, the ones who didn't, the ones who'd finally be heard. She thought of Lindström too, not with anger, but with the strange, sad understanding that power without empathy always destroys itself. The wind rose again, cold and clean. She whispered to no one in particular, "The uniform doesn't make you worthy, you make it worthy." Her voice carried over the water, thin and steady, and for a moment she imagined it might reach every broken recruit, every forgotten name buried in a file drawer somewhere. Maybe that was enough. Because justice, she'd learned, isn't a single act. It's a series of quiet choices made by people who refuse to stay silent. She turned from the pier, the lights behind her glowing brighter against the dark. Duty wasn't over, it never was, but it had changed shape. It was no longer about commands and medals, it was about people. And as she walked back toward the barracks, toward whatever came next, her steps were slower, lighter. Not triumphant, just true. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And when it does, the whole world listens.